I chose this design because it got a lot of love on Instagram, and that turned out to be not the best reason. So this is the Vineyard Tee, my own design that I knitted back in 2022. I shared the progress on Instagram and received a lot of positive feedback and interest. At that point, I had already published a few accessory patterns and garments in my own size, and I thought, if there's this much interest, why not create it and make it available to more people? And I'm still very proud of that decision. I learned a lot during the process. I still like the overall design, but in hindsight, there are definitely things I would approach differently today. One thing I definitely underestimated was the grading process, especially with a lace detail like this one, where you're working with a fixed stitch count that can't simply be adjusted proportionally for each size. In the smaller sizes, the fronts start almost entirely in lace, while the larger sizes include more stockinette stitch, which actually adds a bit more structural stability. Another major factor was yarn choice. At the time, I hadn't worked much with pure cotton. I knew it wouldn't have much elasticity and that it wouldn't grow much during blocking. I designed the tee with a loose fit, thinking that would make things easier. I assumed I could simply try it on while knitting and wouldn't have to worry about post-blocking changes. And that's where I was wrong. Cotton may not change much with blocking, but it absolutely changes with wear and gravity. It creates a relatively dense fabric, and that adds weight. Compared to something like merino, the finished garment was significantly heavier, and over time, gravity did its job. Cotton doesn't have a memory like wool yarns do, so washing again didn't help the problem. In my original sample, I had included waist shaping. Right off the needles, it fit beautifully. But as the fabric relaxed, the waist shaping dropped lower and lower. The neckline had also been carefully adjusted so that even with the lace detail, my bra wasn't that much visible. But it changed too. Over time, the neckline became deeper and more revealing. And I ended up wearing a top underneath almost all the time. So the fabric behavior completely shifted how the garment actually functioned in daily wear. When writing the pattern, I accounted for these issues. I removed the waist shaping and adjusted the neckline depth to anticipate growth. But that made grading even more complex because I had to rely almost entirely on math rather than real-life fitting across sizes. Most designers work with test knitters to ensure clarity, fit, and overall functionality. It's common practice to compensate testers with a free pattern or other benefits. Since I offer all my patterns for free and this was my first graded pattern, I didn't feel comfortable asking people to test knit without being able to offer anything in return. So the grading was based on calculations and my own technical understanding. I do update patterns whenever issues are brought to my attention, and I clearly communicate that they aren't formally test knit. But this experience made me realize just how thorough and time-consuming professional pattern design really is. It's not just creativity, it's engineering and lots of mistakes fixing. I'm still proud of this design, not because it was perfect, it wasn't, but because it marked a turning point for me. It was the first time I truly stepped into grading and made the design available in multiple sizes. That carries a completely different level of responsibility compared to designing only for yourself. And that's vulnerable. Since then, I've designed the faded line shirt, and I approached it very differently, more intentionally, with more awareness of fabric behavior, yarn structure, and long time wear. It actually uses a cotton blend. I would still use cotton today, but most likely I would use a blend to balance stability and drape. I also received some critical feedback on the Vineyard Tea. Interestingly, most of it focused on technical choices, like cast-ons, increases, and decreases, rather than on the fit itself. Some comments even assumed a lack of knowledge instead of recognizing them as conscious design decisions. That was a learning moment too. Putting something created out into the world means exposing your thinking, your choices, your experience level, and that can feel uncomfortable. There wasn't overwhelming positive feedback, but there are finished projects on Ravelry. People knitted it, people wore it, and that matters. For me, this design represents growth, not flawless execution, but a willingness to try, to learn publicly, and to improve. And I'm currently thinking about revisiting it, maybe reworking it with a different yarn and update construction choices. Not because I regret it, but because I've grown since then, and I'm curious what the design could look like now. I'd actually love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever revisited one of your older makes or designs? And if you're one of the few people who knitted the Vineyard Tea, what was your experience? Did you like it? I think conversations like this are important, because growth doesn't happen in silence, it happens in exchange.